So we're here today with two members of the Senate leadership, the Kentucky Senate Democratic leadership, Senator Gerald Neal and Senator Reggie Thomas. Gentlemen, thank you for coming to Moving Kentucky Forward.
Thanks for
For
having
having us.
So we're a few weeks later than we had maybe planned on doing this, and so we're not as timely as we might like with the session. However, I think maybe it gives us a little time to reflect and absorb some of what happened. So, how in a word or two, how would you describe this year's session? And Senator Neal, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Bruce. Glad to be here. Glad to see you. Let me say to you that what you have to think about is that this is like our short session. So what that means is some people refer to as a cleanup session, in fact, so that we take care of a lot of things we didn't get done, a lot of things that we wanted to get done, but we're unable to do that. We deal with things that is timely to deal with right now, that must be dealt with or should be dealt with in the time frame. So therefore, you won't find a lot of home runs or blockbusters out there. Generally, that doesn't mean that doesn't happen. It can happen. But when I look at this session, I feel the same way, except there are, in my mind, a few notable things that are really worth discussing and folks keeping an eye on.
So, I guess we'll get back to those couple of things. Senator Thomas, how would you describe the session in a few short words?
Well, once again, Bruce, it's good to see you again. Uh, Bruce, I would say that this session was challenging. There were certainly some things to like about it. There were some good pieces of legislation, I will admit. But also, there were some very bad pieces of legislation, and they were hard to swallow. So it was a very challenging session, and it just reinforces the fact that the Democrats have a lot of work to do in the legislature because I don't think that we really moved the ball forward as much as we should have for Kentuckians.
Speaking of bad bills and good bills, there were, of course, we have a bill tracker on our website, and so we were tracking which good ones and which bad ones were moving, and there were some of both. So, Senator Thomas, what would you say would be one or two good bills that you are glad to see passed and you were proud to help pass?
I think the best bill we passed, Bruce, was the bill giving schools the authority to take cell phones away from students
Hmm.
during the school day. That was the best piece of legislation that we passed this session. I was 100% behind that bill, and I'm glad we did that. I think that will make students more engaged in school, more engaged with teachers. Uh, Students can now talk to one another rather than through their cell phone. So that's a very good bill. That's what I would highlight as being a very good bill.
Okay. Senator Neal, one or two bills that you were proud to help pass?
Well, let me say I join Senator Thomas with respect to the phone bill, but that bill to me fits right in there with the a lot of other bills in the same framework with me. So I can't say that it's the best bill in my mind. It is something I supported strongly, and I agree with the comments made by Senator Thomas with respect to that. But what folks need to understand is that usually most of the stuff that we pass, we agree on. We do about maybe 90 or more percentage points of legislation that we agree on. So that doesn't get the flags with respect to that. But there's a number of things that were done. I really want to talk about the bad stuff because there was a lot of that.
Yeah,
But we
I'm
did we did nudge forward with Senate Bill 4 on AI, which we need to do. Senator Thomas could probably speak to it better than I could because he was on a committee that our task force that dealt with that. But I thought it was very important because most of the states are behind in the United States, and we're behind some of the places, well, a lot of places internationally. So that's something we got to get up on. And
mhm.
I was glad to see movement in that particular area. I agree with Senator Thomas on that particular bill there. I like the fact that we created a Kentucky Film Office that's going to service Eastern Kentucky. I think that was important, not only from the standpoint that they have that type of activity happening in that part of the state, but it also gives them tools to project the state, that aspect of the state, and the issues that impacts it, plus and minus. So I think that helps them with respect to that, not just the economic aspect. I think that there's some things that we did, for instance, in the health area that I think were important and useful, like Medicaid oversight and advisory board, that sort of thing. But I'm going to wait just a little bit because I really want to talk about the bad stuff or the stuff I have concern about.
Well, and I do too. I want to ask you one question though. You said a lot of the stuff you pass has 90% of the stuff you pass has agreement. Are you saying bipartisan agreement that there's a lot of bills that you pass that everybody's behind?
Yeah. Well, see, the press normally, and I understand why, but the press has a tendency, and people have a tendency to home in on things we disagree with. We get on the floor and say things and they're discordant and so forth and so on. I understand it, and people should know that. But a
Okay.
lot of things that we pass in a major session and in a session such as we just came out of, we agree on with no controversy. We understand it. We do a lot of things to push things along that we've already established in policy, and we tweaking it, for instance. Every once in a while, something big comes along that we have some agreement on. And of course, during the interim, we have the opportunity to talk about these things
Mhm.
and get into the details. And so I would say, and I think it's true that it varies, but I'm saying 90+% of the things that we pass normally are like that. This session might be a little different there's a lot of bad stuff and
Well,
a lot of questionable stuff that was involved that was very worrisome. Let me put it that
well,
way.
let's jump right into that. I wanted to get to bad bills, so Senator Neal, why don't you lead off? You obviously have
Okay,
some that are top of mind for you.
right, because I could talk all day, so I'm gonna grab two of them and I'm gonna defer to
Okay.
my colleague here, and then maybe we come back if you wish. Always, the question is, what do we do with taxes, what we do with the budget? It is the major policy document that we engage in. And a few cycles back, we engaged in a process of racing to zero in income tax,
Hmm.
eliminating income tax. Some people may feel really joyous about it. I mean, who wants to reach in their pocket and pay an extra dollar when you don't have to? But the fact of the matter is that in my mind, it gives me significant concern because there is no research that I can find. And I want you to know I've been diligent about this, and maybe there's something out there, but I haven't found it that shows when you do that, that means you're going to end up with a sound economy and it's going to catapult your state forward. In Kentucky, basically, we were the beneficiaries of the ARPA money, the money that came out of the COVID piece. We hoarded a lot of that money. We were also a beneficiary of good economic conditions, which happened in most places around the United States of America, quite frankly. It had nothing to do with the fact that we've now are not only going into the session down to from 6 to 4%, but now we've authorized it down further to 3.5. And I want to make these points real quickly. We're not Florida. Florida is a tourist haven. We can't compare our reality with Florida. We're not Tennessee, but Tennessee is notable because if you look at it, the fact of the matter is that one of the things that we're going to have to watch for, and they do not put on the table when they say adopt this policy of going to zero, is how are you going to pay for services that perhaps you take for granted right now, but are needed? Where are you going to get that money? That means you got to find a new stream of money with respect to that, or do away with the service, or compromise the service. So Tennessee is just a good example of what happens when you have a state next to you that looks at sales tax, which is one of those streams, which means it's a likely course of action to get additional funds, which is a regressive tax, which
Hmm.
means if you make less money, you proportionately pay more, quite frankly. But Tennessee is notable in that if you go to the border of Tennessee, you'll find that because they have a sales tax higher than ours, that they do what? They come over to Kentucky and buy stuff. So it's but I go back to the point that there's nothing that suggests these other things, and our taxes are not horrendous in that particular regard in terms of the services we need. And here's one point I want to make. Kentucky is not a state that functions like a New York or a California or some of these other areas that got good, sound, robust economies. We are basically a poor state. We rely 1.5 million of our citizens are on Medicaid. Come
Mm-hmm.
on. We have a history of this. Doesn't mean we can't do better. We are doing better. In fact, under Governor Bashir, Andy Bashir, I can't give him all the credit, but I'll give him a whole heck of a lot of credit because of his leadership and because he's responded even to troubles in our state. We have been able to benefit, at least in the short term, economically, and it bodes well for the future, except there are some warning signs. That's number one concern of mine. But the number two thing I have to say is that instead of the legislature taking advantage of an opportunity in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it followed the lead of a reactionary national government and ideological piece and played upon prejudices, biases, and misnomers, and just some of it's outright lies and misinterpretation of what even diversity, equity, and inclusion means, and blew the opportunity of doing what we say we're about and what Kentucky needs, and that is uplifting everyone so they can contribute strongly to our economies. And I got to tell you this, and I hate to talk like this, but they literally lied. When I say they, I'm general, not everybody, but the ones that sat back were complicit. But the fact of the matter is, they literally misrepresented that. They put it out there, and the folks that felt it didn't affect them laid back and let it roll. And then those people who are directly affected are those of us that recognize what's going on. We have to fight strongly about that. That was the singularly most disappointing thing that I saw happen in this last session.
Senator Thomas.
Senator Neal makes some very persuasive arguments and does highlight two of the truly disappointing measures that were taken in this legislative session. I just want to briefly highlight a couple, and then we can expand on where you want to go with the bills we laid out. I think two others that are noteworthy. The first one, in my opinion, was what's called Senate Bill 89, which basically allowed coal companies and other manufacturers to really harm, destroy, poison wells, springs, creeks, all waterways other than what they call navigable waterways, such as rivers, so that people who rely on those wells, springs, and creeks, to drink, to bathe, to cook, are now at risk of not having good water to use. I mean, they are at risk of being another Flint, Michigan, if I may give you a stark example.
Sure.
Of what we did with Senate Bill 89. I just think that bill is really tragic for people outside what I could, because we talked about the Golden Triangle. It doesn't affect. Let me give you the critical point here. It doesn't affect Louisville, doesn't affect Lexington, doesn't affect Northern Kentucky. But if you remove those communities, that bill impacts the majority of Kentuckians, the majority of remaining Kentuckians across the state. Those Kentuckians outside that Golden Triangle are at risk now of not having quality water to use for critical needs as bathing, cleaning, drinking, cooking.
Yeah.
So Senate Bill 89 was a really bad misstep by the legislature. Another one that I think is equally damaging, and this was done under cover of darkness, was a bill that really weakened accessibility to Medicaid here in this state. What we did was we increased the qualifications and applications to achieve Medicaid. And in addition, we lowered our standards, saying that whatever the federal rules are now for Medicaid, Kentucky must follow those. In the past, before this year, we had higher standards regarding what benefits and what care we provide our Medicaid recipients. Not now, after the passage of that bill. Uh, and again, to drive this point home, over about one third of all Kentuckians are on Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to see a significant decline in the quality of health care people are going to receive in this state with the increased requirements to obtain Medicaid and the lowering of standards by this state.
The cuts that they're talking about on Medicaid are very concerning. And you're both of you are right on these bills. These were all headline bills for us in terms of bills that we called about and fought against and so on and so forth. I want to ask you a little bit more difficult question. I try not to talk about the person. I try to talk about the action. So I try to say that's a really stupid thing to do rather than you are stupid. So I want to do the same thing with some of these bills. Do you think that some of these bills, particularly the anti-DEI one and some of the trans and LGBTQ ones, were driven by actual prejudice, or were they just making political hay? Or was there actual prejudice behind some of it?
If I may, it would be naive for anyone to say that there's not a very strong element of racial prejudice, and I call it prejudice of the other. You call it the LBD, the those gender biases and that sort of thing. But yes, all those things happen. That's why it's so comfortable for those who use it strategically to lump them together and use them as a hammer, a cudgel, if you will, to drive home their position, their value systems, and they what is so frustrating is that when they intentionally misrepresent what
Hmm.
it is or what they're dealing with, then you have to assume that these intelligent people, and I haven't run into anybody that's not intelligent that I've worked with in the Senate, and I don't know as the same number of people in the House, but we're working with some intelligent people. They have staffs behind them that can go deep into research and provide them with information they want. They have life's experiences, and generally they've been successful in life in our systems and so forth. And yet they would engage intentionally in suppressing someone's history, particularly given the history we have in the United States of America
Hmm.
toward people of black and brown, uh, uh, transgender, you name it, women. I mean, outwardly. And that's a history that we are trying to address in becoming a more perfect union. So I'm in the more perfect union bag. And
Hmm.
I hear what you said because that's the way I approach it. Because it's difficult to go back and point to somebody and say that person's racist. It's probably better to say that action that was taken by that person was racist.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean necessarily the person's racist, but they very well may be. And I would be naive, as I said, to think that that is not the case in all of those categories. Racism is alive and well, and so are the others.
So uh, and again, this is an awkward question, but as black legislators in the Senate, does seeing these bills come up and get passed affect your relationships with fellow legislators? Do you look at them and go, how do you come up and shake my hand after you pass that bill?
Bruce, that's an excellent question. I always try not to get emotional or personal when I'm dealing with legislation because I'm there to represent my constituency first, but also the people of Kentucky. So I always have to step back and say, look, what is the best position for this particular bill at this particular point in time? But obviously, and I use diversity, equity, inclusion as an example. Obviously, when I hear people talk against that and want to eliminate the movement toward diversity, toward inclusion, toward equity, I can't help but think that that impacts people like me, and is an action that wants to takes us back to the 50s and 40s, to a time where we were discriminated against by law and had limited opportunity, and were treated second class citizens. Of course, I think about that. I'm human. So that those kind of actions, really run deep in my veins, and do impact my viewpoint on what I think a legislature should do and what the people in the legislature should do.
So you are in a super minority because they have a super majority, or as Joni Jenkins once said, a super duper majority. What do you think that we as Democrats need to be doing, either at the KDP level, local level, individual, whatever? What do you think we need to be doing to change this thing around some and gain some seats in the Senate?
Joe, you want me to take that first? You want to take that first?
Well, if you don't mind,
Okay.
look, there are multiple things that need to be done, and a lot of those things are being undertaken. The lifting is heavy,
Hmm.
obviously, but I want to start with this. We have some of the sharpest, committed, focused legislators that they have in the United States of America right here in Kentucky. And I know that because of the role I play in leadership with other leaders and with my members. And then I look and deal with the others that are in the majority, and not to depreciate their value, because I think, as I've said before, there's very bright people in the Senate and the House as well. But the fact of the matter is that if you cannot maintain, if you can't have a scruff one day and come back the next day and do your business, you need to go somewhere else.
Hmm.
Our job is to represent, as Reggie has said. But I will say this: I think it's useful. I think it's useful to draw the line and not just like you're in some kind of textbook situation and you're just going through the motions and you take a vote, you win, you lose. I think you should strategically express your disdain. I think you lose credibility if you do it all the time because people only see you in these situations. But I think strategically and thoughtfully, it's okay. But then I think you got to come back the next day and you got to be the professional that we must be to deal in that environment. So it doesn't bother me. I've been there long enough. I understand who I'm dealing with. I do not take it personal when I'm dealing with somebody. And another way to say it is, I can make a deal with the devil if it's going to benefit people and uplift others. I want to uplift. That's what I'm about. That's what our caucus is about. We're not about suppressing and stepping on people and putting people down. That's not our piece. But I can walk through a lot of this legislation. I know my friend and colleague Reggie Thomas could do it song and verse that it's indefensible. Some of the positions that majorities take, the hubris of the majority, the because you have the power doesn't mean you exercise it. You have to go back to your values. So if you do those things, that's part of your values.
Hmm.
So it is what it is. But we there to do the people's business.
So I made a comment one time to a former colleague of yours that it seemed to me that the Republicans in Frankfurt, the Republican legislators in Frankfurt, were not necessarily as bad as the ones in the U.S. House. And this person corrected me immediately and said, "Oh, no, you're wrong. Um, Look at the tactics they use. Look at the way they run things, particularly since they have a supermajority. They are authoritarian. They are determined. They care about power more than anything." So that's pretty blunt talk from this former colleague of yours. Senator Thomas, is that fair? Or if you're passing some things with bipartisanship, maybe that's not fair.
Look, look, I have a lot of respect for all of my colleagues. There are some I have better relationships with than others, and there's some I think very highly of. Um, uh, I will say this: uh, one of the actions that they take that I have railed against, have strongly disapproved over the last 2 years, and will continue to do so during the interim and next year, is this ability to be able to uh, over uh, ignore and override the public's ability to comment on bills by coming to the committee with a committee substitute, a brand new bill, brand new language, getting that passed out of committee, and then 2 or 3 hours later, bring it to the floor for a
Mhm.
vote without any ability of the current members to uh, file floor amendments against that bill, or for the public to review that bill and for the public to comment on that bill the night before or the next day prior to the vote. I think that is what irritates me, because that frustrates democracy. That uh, overrides the ability of the public to comment on bills, and it really just stamps on democracy. I mean, there's no democracy there. It's just passing legislation that they want without any care or concern for the people of that state. So that's one action that I'm just totally opposed to, and will always fight against that action until the rules are changed.
And that feels like a power move. We do it because we
It,
can.
it definitely is a power move. There's no question about that.
It's the reality of an adversarial system.
Hmm.
It's imperfect. It's probably the best thing we got going in the context of a democracy. Under threat, I would argue now, because of the leadership and the tone of those who are intentionally trying to consolidate power, uh, to advance their piece instead of the give and take, and that whole piece. But I'll say this: we have a system where I don't think we can avoid it. I've been in the leadership, not the leadership. I've been in the legislature when Democrats were in control for a significant period of time as well. And I saw things that you find when people have power that I thought was not a good exercise of power.
Mm-hmm.
But I also can say this, observing what's going on now, it's not like these people, when I say these people, the opposition is 100% bad. I don't believe that. They do good things. We do good things. We have probably more in common than we don't. But when we get ideological, and when we deal with the question of power that you're raising here, then sometimes you begin to lose what real leadership is about. And leadership has got to be about bringing people together, facing the realities of what we've done in the past and how we move forward to do it better, and uplifting people every opportunity that we get. If you're not about that, what are you about in these seats?
So let me ask a couple more questions. One of the things that I always was impressed with was collegiality. So I want to tell a story. I'll try and make it short. When I was in seminary, there were two professors who really um, had very different views of certain theological questions, very different views. And they were lecturing opposite one another in Norton Hall at Southern when it was not air conditioned. And so it was in the spring and it's hot. And so the doors are open. And one of them yells across to the other room and yells at the other professor, why are you teaching them that crap? And the professor said, well, if you think you can do better, let's talk about it. He said, well, come on. So the one professor goes across the hall to the other room, and all the students go and they try to find a place to sit. And for about 45 minutes, the two of them just go at it about this particular topic. I mean, they're drawing Greek on the board and just really tearing into each other. And the students, of course, are all taking notes as fast as they can because this is good stuff. And then one of them looks at his watch and says, wow, it's time for lunch. You want to go get a sandwich? And the other one said, yes, I do. Let's go. And they just walked out after having been at each other tooth and tongue for 45 minutes. They walked out arm in arm to go get a sandwich. And to me, that is what the legislature should be like. It should be, we're not scared about our policies and our principles, but we also value one another as humans. over the past, say, 8 years, has that increased, decreased, stayed the same? Am I just in idealistic Pollyanna land or what?
Fred?
Gerald, you want me to take that first? Or
Yeah, please.
uh, I'll say this, Bruce. I think collegiality does exist. And that's what I was trying to say in my prefatory remarks to you when I just previously spoke. Yeah, we speak, we're friendly. Um, we don't say rude things to one another. So I think the collegiality there in the Senate still exists. Having said that, I think Gerald made an excellent point some time ago when he says we have a duty, we have a responsibility to emphasize our points of view and to call out bad policy and policy that's damaging and
Mhm.
discriminatory and hateful for people. And we should never shy away from doing that, Bruce. Um, and we can do that and be as vociferous and as zealous in our points as possible. And still, at the end of the day, when we go out of the chamber or come back the next day, speak and say hello, and be polite and kind to one another.
Gerald, you want to, excuse me, Senator Neal, you want to jump in on this?
Gerald's fine. Let me just say, I don't kick my when I was raising my children, I don't kick them out the door because they go and do bad things. I still engage them. They may get a spanking. Of course, I didn't spank my children. We talked to them until they felt like they've been spanked. But my point is that you deal with it, and I think Reggie's made the point. You deal with it. That doesn't mean you have to hate someone that's in that situation. But my problem is when I see intentionality
Mm.
and someone gets so into ideological stuff and you sit down and you have a talk and Reggie, I know he's had the same experience. We'll sit down and talk and agree philosophically and any other kind of way and get in those chambers, and it's clear they're doing something quite different. But that's because we also not only have individuals functioning, we're functioning in groups. If UK does something bad in recruiting and gets suspended, you're not going to abandon UK if you're a UK fan. You see, you're still going to support UK. So we have that same kind of dynamic there. And so some will be quiet when we would like for them to talk louder, you know? And some of them deal behind the scenes. See, I want to be fair. Some of them deal behind the scenes. The first time we stopped that anti-DEI bill, I have to tell you, Republicans, certain levels of Republicans joined us in defeating it the first time and helped us run out the clock. Unfortunately, this time they got their act together a little better, and we expected it, so we had to deal with it a different way. Let me be quiet on that, but that's sort of my look at it. Yeah, there's collegiality, but that doesn't mean everybody is not doing like one of my kids when I don't want them to do bad things.
Mm. Mm. So, two last questions. First of all, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you about?
You did a good job,
Yeah, I can't think.
very good job.
I can't think of anything.
All right. So this is my favorite closing question. I use it with almost every interview. If I gave each of you a magic wand and you could wave that magic wand and have anything you want happen in the legislature or in Frankfurt or in Kentucky, you can whatever you want. What would you do with your magic wand? And either one of you can go first.
Reggie, I'm gonna defer to you.
Okay, fine. Bruce, we need a more balanced legislature. Okay, uh, we need more Democrats in the Senate and the House because that would bring balance and in my view, more common sense
Mm,
to some legislation we pass. Of course, you don't do that by magic wand, Bruce. You do that by hard work
yeah.
uh, and money and professional advice um, and just good old hard campaigning, good campaign strategy. So I understand that that's not a magic wand issue. That's a function of hard working, recruiting good candidates. But that's what we need here in Kentucky desperately now. We need to bring more balance and more reason to the state legislature. We need more Democrats in the state legislature.
All right. Senator
From,
Neal.
from my standpoint, and from a tactical reality standpoint, I agree with everything that Senator Thomas just said. However, if I had a magic wand, I would hope that folks that operate in our capacity would understand that at the end of the day, this is not us against you. At the end of the day, it's about us coming together to do the people's business, and that we don't just suppress, we look for the good in policy that benefits all. And I know there's no perfect solution to that, but we should strive for it. And that's what democracy is about when it was started in this country. It was trying to find and create that more perfect union. We will not find perfection, but we must strive for a more perfect union. And if we think like that as we move forward, if we give room and grace to others that are there for the same reasons, basically, then I think we can do better. I'm not looking for perfect outcomes, but I am looking for us to do the right thing by our fellow man and woman. And I think we can if we make that a priority in terms of our philosophical and ethical groundings.
I will wave my magic wand to both of your wishes. I think they are both excellent, and let's hope we can achieve both of them. Senator Reginald Thomas, Senator Gerald Neal, thank you both for being with us today. And maybe we'll get back together once the long session starts next year.
Let's do it.